"You're fired." The billionaire's voice thundered through the mansion's pristine hallways, shattering the calm of an otherwise ordinary day. The black maid stood frozen, her hand instinctively closing around the small object hidden deep in her pocket, something that would change everything. What happened next would turn their worlds upside down in ways neither could have imagined. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The sun barely touched the skyline over New York when the silence of the Langford estate was broken by the crash of glass. John Smith, the powerful CEO whose words shaped boardrooms and destinies, stormed into the marble foyer, his face a storm cloud as he fixed his gaze on Maria Costa, the maid who had served his family for decades. "What happened here?" John demanded, his voice echoing through the cavernous entrance hall. The shards of the delicate crystal vase, Claire's favorite, lay scattered across the imported marble, catching the early morning light like fallen stars. Maria's hands shook as she gripped the broom, her heart pounding in her chest. "I'm sorry, Mr. Smith. I was dusting and my sleeve caught." "That was the last gift from my wife," he interrupted, his words sharp as the fragments between them. The mansion felt suddenly colder, emptier, as if Claire's memory itself had shattered along with the vase. The housekeeper lowered her eyes, weathering his anger as she had for 23 years. She'd seen this man build empires and crush competitors, but never had his rage been directed so personally at her. Maria had been there through everything: Claire's illness, the lonely nights after, the slow withdrawal of the man who once filled rooms with laughter. "It was irreplaceable," John continued, his knuckles white against his smartphone. He'd just come from a board meeting where 3 executives had opposed him, the first challenge to his authority in years. Now this. The universe seemed determined to remind him of everything he'd lost. Maria nodded silently, her weathered hands already moving to collect the larger pieces. She'd been the one who held Claire's hand during those final days, who promised to look after the stubborn man they both loved. Now she saw the broken vase as an omen. Her time in this house was ending. "I understand, sir," she said quietly, dignity in every syllable. "I'll pack my things after I clean this up." John's eyes narrowed. He hadn't even fired her yet, but she knew. Of course she knew. Maria had always possessed an uncanny ability to read him, just as Claire had. It only fueled his frustration. She saw the broken vase, the last gift from John's late wife Claire, and braced herself for the one word she dreaded most. "You're fired." The words hung between them, final and cold. 23 years of loyalty, of quiet service, of being the only constant in this house of grief. Dismissed with 2 syllables, Maria straightened her back, feeling every one of her 62 years. She didn't beg or plead. The loyal employee simply nodded, her eyes dry but her heart breaking for what she knew would happen to John without her. Without someone who remembered Claire's laughter, who knew how to coax light back into these dark halls. The word "fired" echoed through the cold, cavernous halls of the Langford estate, making Maria Costa's shoulders slump with resignation. She had been invisible for so long in this mansion, moving like a shadow through rooms larger than the apartment she'd grown up in. But now, under John Smith's glare, she felt painfully seen, in the worst possible way. "I'll pack my things," she whispered, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. 23 years of service ended in a moment of rage over a broken vase. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd outlasted 3 estate managers, countless gardeners, and even survived the darkest days after Claire's passing. Yet here she was, dismissed over porcelain shards. Maria turned toward the servants' staircase, dignity intact, though her heart was breaking. She wouldn't beg. She wouldn't cry, at least not where the CEO could see her. The housekeeper had her pride, even now. As she pivoted, a folded envelope slipped from the pocket of her uniform, landing on the polished marble with a whisper. John's eyes caught the familiar wax seal, the unmistakable script of his late wife, and his anger froze mid-breath. Wait. His voice changed, the thunderous tone replaced by something raw and vulnerable. What is that? Maria glanced down, color draining from her face. The letter, Claire's letter, the one she'd carried close to her heart for nearly 2 years. She bent to retrieve it, but John was faster, his expensive leather shoes appearing in her downcast vision. That's Claire's handwriting, he said, suspicion and grief warring in his voice. His fingers hovered over the envelope without touching it, as if it might disintegrate. Why do you have something with my wife's writing? The housekeeper straightened, meeting his gaze directly for perhaps the first time in all their years together. She saw the pain there, beneath the anger, the same pain she carried herself. Mrs. Smith gave it to me before she... Maria couldn't finish the sentence. Even now, speaking of Claire's death felt like betrayal. John's hand trembled slightly. And you've kept it hidden all this time? What else are you hiding? The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Maria's fingers closed protectively around the envelope. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. Claire had been specific about when and how certain truths should come to light. Not hiding, sir, she replied softly. Protecting. There's a difference. Maria Costa hesitated, her fingers trembling as she handed John the envelope. The weathered paper felt like a betrayal in her hands. Something sacred she was surrendering. For nearly 15 years, she had guarded her own pain in this house, folding it quietly into the linens and routines of the Langford estate. She had become expert at invisibility, moving through rooms like a shadow, absorbing the family's grief alongside her own. What is this? John demanded again, his voice softer now, but no less commanding. It's from Claire, Maria whispered, her voice barely audible. She gave it to me before. The words trailed off, neither of them needing the reminder of that terrible day when cancer had finally claimed his wife. This letter was something she treasured, a piece of Claire Smith's trust that belonged to her alone. In the hierarchy of the household, Maria had always understood her place, but Claire had seen her differently, not as staff, but as something more. John tore the envelope open with impatient fingers, his businessman's hands making quick work of the seal his late wife had pressed shut. His eyes scanned the first lines, expecting some explanation for his wife's secrecy, perhaps even a confession. The crease between his eyebrows deepened as confusion replaced anger. "This is addressed to you," he said, looking up at Maria with bewilderment. The housekeeper nodded, her eyes downcast. She wrote several letters in those last weeks. John's gaze returned to the delicate handwriting that still had the power to make his heart contract. The familiar loops and curves of Claire's penmanship transported him instantly to breakfast tables and birthday cards, to love notes left in suit pockets. Why would she write to you and not tell me? The CEO's voice cracked slightly, revealing the wounded man beneath the powerful exterior. Maria shifted her weight, uncomfortable with his scrutiny. "Mrs. Smith, Claire, she trusted me with certain things she didn't want to burden you with." John read silently, his expression transforming with each line. The letter contained intimate details, shared confidences between the two women that he had never been privy to. Claire had entrusted Maria with her fears, her hopes for John after she was gone, her wishes for the foundation they had built together. The powerful man looked up, seeing the maid, truly seeing her, perhaps for the first time. In her dark eyes, he recognized something he hadn't expected. The same grief he carried, worn differently, but just as heavy. "She trusted you," John said finally, the realization settling over him like a weight. Maria nodded. "And I've kept that trust, sir, every day since she left us." John Smith stood frozen, the letter trembling slightly between his fingers as his eyes scanned Claire's elegant handwriting. The morning sunlight streaming through the windows seemed to illuminate each word with painful clarity. His throat tightened as he read the intimate message his late wife had left for Maria Costa, not him. "If anything happens to me, Make sure John eats breakfast at the table. Not alone. Not in silence. Make him feel life again. You're the only one he trusts, even if he pretends not to. The CEO's chest constricted with an emotion he couldn't immediately identify. For 2 years since Claire's passing, he had buried himself in work, avoiding the empty spaces of the Langford estate that echoed with her absence. Now, standing in the marble foyer with the broken vase fragments still scattered at his feet, he felt something crack inside him too. Maria stood quietly, her hands clasped together, watching as the powerful man who had just fired her absorbed his wife's words. She had carried that letter close to her heart for so long, reading it on difficult days when the weight of her promise to Claire felt too heavy. "She wrote this to you," John finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not to me." The housekeeper nodded, her eyes steady despite her fear. "Mrs. Smith gave it to me 3 days before she passed. She made me promise not to show it to you unless absolutely necessary." John read the letter again, noting how Claire had entrusted this woman, someone he had treated as invisible for years, with his emotional well-being. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. While he had been signing contracts and closing deals, Maria had been quietly honoring his wife's wishes, trying to coax life back into his rigid routine. "She trusted you," he said, the words falling heavily between them. "We talked a lot during her final months," Maria admitted. "When you were at work, she worried about you." The weight of his wife's request crashed over him, sharper than any accusation. All this time, he had thought of Maria as merely staff, efficient, loyal, but ultimately replaceable. Now he saw the truth Claire had recognized long ago. This woman was a confidant, a keeper of promises, someone who had shared his wife's most vulnerable moments. For the first time since Claire's death, John looked, truly looked, at Maria Costa. Not as a servant, but as someone his wife had valued enough to entrust with her deepest concerns. Someone who might be more family than employee. The letter in his hand suddenly felt like a bridge between worlds, between the man he had become and the one Claire had hoped he would remain. John Smith stood frozen, the letter from his late wife still clutched in his trembling hands. The revelation that Claire had confided in Maria Costa, not just as a servant, but as someone she deeply trusted, left him speechless. He glanced at the maid, seeing her for perhaps the first time not as staff, but as someone who had shared his wife's final moments in ways he never had. Maria gathered her few belongings, dignity intact, despite the sting of being fired moments earlier. Her weathered hands moved methodically, folding the small apron she'd worn for nearly 2 decades in this grand house. The weight of Claire's other letters pressed against her heart from inside her uniform pocket. Some secrets were still hers to keep, at least for now. "You're leaving?" John asked, his authoritative voice suddenly uncertain. "You fired me, Mr. Smith," Maria replied simply, no bitterness in her tone, just the plain truth. The CEO ran his hand through his silver-streaked hair, the familiar gesture of frustration Maria had witnessed countless times during business calls. The mansion suddenly felt impossibly large and empty, just as it had in the months following Claire's passing. "I was hasty," he admitted, the words clearly difficult for a man accustomed to being unquestionably right. Maria paused by the door, her small suitcase in hand. 20 years of service packed into one modest case. She thought of Anna, her goddaughter, who would be disappointed to hear about this abrupt ending. The young pre-law student had always admired the Langford estate from Maria's stories. "Stay one more day, please," John said quietly, the command in his voice replaced by something unfamiliar, a request. The housekeeper studied his face, noting the dark circles under his eyes, the slight tremor in his usually steady hands. Claire would want her to stay, that much she knew with certainty. "Just one day?" she asked. John nodded, unable to articulate more. The foundation Claire had built, the one that had gone silent after her death, flashed through his mind. Perhaps Maria knew more about that too. Very well, Maria agreed, setting down her suitcase. Her pride was wounded, but her heart felt oddly hopeful. Throughout her life, she had always believed in grace, had extended it to her estranged brother Pedro, despite their painful past, had offered it to employers who rarely saw her humanity. But now, as she hung her coat back on the rack by the service entrance, Maria realized something profound. Perhaps, for the first time in her life, she wasn't just being asked to give grace, but to receive it as well. That evening, Maria Costa moved through the Langford estate with practiced grace, her footsteps barely audible against the marble floors. The mansion had always felt too large, too empty since Claire's passing, and tonight was no different. The housekeeper paused at the antique cabinet, carefully extracting a small metal tin. Claire's favorite chamomile tea from a small shop in Vermont they'd visited together years ago. She placed it prominently in the pantry, where John would inevitably find it during his late-night wanderings. In the grand living room, Maria's fingers lingered over the collection of vinyl records gathering dust. She selected one, a forgotten jazz album Claire used to play on Sunday mornings, and set it gently on the turntable. The soft, melancholy notes of a saxophone filled the space, bringing life to rooms that had known only silence for too long. Yellow tulips, Claire's favorites, now adorned the crystal vase in the foyer. Maria arranged them with care, remembering how the late Mrs. Smith would insist on fresh flowers even in winter. "A house needs living things," Claire had once told her, "or it becomes just walls and floors." The bright blooms seemed to breathe warmth back into the cold mansion, defiant against the sterility John had cultivated in his grief. In the kitchen, John Smith lingered, his smartphone clutched in one hand as he pretended to review emails. The CEO's shoulders remained tense, his expression guarded, but his eyes kept drifting toward the doorway each time Maria passed. He hadn't spoken since their earlier confrontation, since the letter had changed everything between them. The aroma came unexpectedly, rich, buttery, and achingly familiar. John's head snapped up as the scent of fresh-baked cornbread wafted through the air. Not just any cornbread, but Claire's wedding recipe, the one she'd insisted on serving at every anniversary dinner. "It needs to cool for 10 minutes, Maria said quietly, setting the cast-iron skillet on the counter. She didn't look at him directly, giving the billionaire space with his emotions. John stared at the golden-brown crust, transported instantly to his wedding day, Claire laughing as she insisted on baking it herself the morning of their ceremony, flour dusting her cheeks. Before the cancer, before the arguments, before the silence. "I didn't know you had her recipe," he finally managed, his voice rough. "She made me memorize it," Maria replied, a small smile touching her lips. Said someone needed to remember the things that matter. For the first time in years, John felt something crack within his carefully constructed isolation. Not weakness, but perhaps the first tentative step toward healing. The attic of the Langford estate had remained untouched for months, dust particles dancing in the thin beams of light that filtered through the small window. Maria Costa moved carefully between stacked furniture and forgotten heirlooms, her fingers trailing over boxes labeled in Claire's elegant handwriting. One particular container caught her eye, a cedar box sealed with Claire's favorite blue ribbon. Maria hesitated before opening it, feeling like an intruder despite having spent more time in this house than most of its owners. When she finally lifted the lid, the scent of Claire's perfume escaped like a ghost. Inside lay a treasure trove of memories, yellowed photographs of John and Claire in their youth, handwritten music sheets of the jazz songs they had danced to, and a leather-bound journal. Her heart nearly stopped when she found a folded paper titled, "Things John Will Need When I'm Gone." The list, written in Claire's increasingly shaky hand during her final months, detailed everything from his morning coffee with exactly 1 teaspoon of sugar 2. Someone to remind him he's more than his work. Maria's name appeared twice, once under people who truly know him, and again beside those who will love him without condition. "I never knew," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. All these years, she had thought herself merely the help, but Claire had seen her as family. Downstairs, John Smith sat in his study, staring at financial reports without truly seeing them. The house felt different today, less like a mausoleum and more like a home with beating hearts. When Maria knocked softly on his door, he looked up to see her holding the cedar box. "I found this in the attic," she said, placing it before him. "I think you should see it." As John examined each item, his composed facade crumbled. A photograph of Claire laughing on their honeymoon, the sheet music to their wedding song, and finally, the list, his wife's final instructions for a life without her. "She knew," he said, his voice barely audible. "She knew exactly what would happen to me." Maria stood quietly, watching as the powerful CEO traced his wife's handwriting with trembling fingers. For the first time, he was seeing the maid not as someone who cleaned his home, but as someone who had shared Claire's final, most sacred moments, someone his wife had trusted with his future. "Why didn't you show me this before?" he asked, not accusingly, but with genuine wonder. "Some things need their right moment," Maria replied softly, "and some wounds need time before they can heal." Lucas Oliveira's phone calls began as mere inquiries, but soon became persistent. The young journalist had been tracking the Claire Smith Foundation's unusual silence since its founder's death. What had once been a beacon of philanthropy in New York's charitable landscape had mysteriously gone dormant. Maria Costa was dusting the library shelves when the house phone rang. She hesitated before answering, still unsure of her place after the recent turmoil. The journalist on the other end asked pointed questions about the foundation's status. The housekeeper deflected politely, promising to pass along his contact information to John Smith. That evening, after serving dinner, Maria retreated to her modest quarters, where she kept a small wooden box beneath her bed. Inside lay documents Claire had entrusted to her. Original foundation records, meeting minutes, and a sealed envelope. With trembling fingers, she opened it for the first time. The contents stole her breath. Claire had named Maria as a future board advisor, citing her unmatched integrity and understanding of our true mission. "Why didn't you tell me?" John demanded, the next morning, his voice echoing through the kitchen after Maria reluctantly shared the documents. "She made me promise to wait until you were ready," the maid replied, her eyes steady despite her racing heart. "You weren't ready until now." The CEO paced across the marble floor, running his hand through his silver-streaked hair. "This journalist, what's his name again?" "Lucas Oliveira. He's been calling the foundation office too." John's instinct was to shut it down, to protect what remained of Claire's legacy and his privacy. "We should ignore him. These reporters just want scandal." Maria placed a cup of coffee before him, the aroma filling the space between them. "Your wife believed in transparency. She also believed in me." The quiet confidence in her voice carried no challenge, only certainty. The businessman studied Maria's face, seeing for the first time the wisdom Claire had recognized. There was something in her calm assurance that reminded him of his late wife's unwavering faith. "What would you suggest?" he asked, surprising himself with the question. "Meet with him. Let me be there. We'll restart the foundation, properly this time." Over the following days, John found himself deferring to Maria on matters concerning Claire's vision. He watched her review grant proposals with meticulous care, her practical experience balancing his business acumen. When Lucas arrived for their meeting, John instinctively looked to Maria before answering difficult questions. "Claire always said the foundation wasn't about charity, but opportunity," she explained to the journalist, her words carrying the weight of intimate knowledge. Slowly, John began to see what Claire had known all along, that sometimes wisdom came from unexpected places, and that Maria's judgment, shaped by a lifetime of careful observation, was worth trusting. The doorbell echoed through the Langford estate on a crisp Sunday afternoon. Maria Costa hurried to answer it, her face lighting up when she saw Ana Santos standing on the doorstep, a bright smile illuminating her features. The 22-year-old pre-law student dropped her weekend bag and embraced her godmother tightly. "I've missed you so much," Ana whispered, her voice carrying the same warmth that had comforted Maria through countless difficult nights. John Smith appeared in the foyer, awkwardly shifting his weight from one foot to another. He extended his hand formally, but Ana surprised him by stepping forward for a hug instead. "Mr. Smith, thank you for having me. Maria's told me so much about this place," she said, her eloquence immediately apparent. The CEO found himself studying the young woman's confident posture and articulate manner. There was something in her expressive gestures and the thoughtful pause before she spoke that reminded him of his childhood friend Eliza, the first person who had ever challenged his ideas and made him think differently. "Ana is top of her class," Maria announced proudly as she led them toward the kitchen. "Just like someone else I know," she added with a meaningful glance at John. In the sunlit kitchen, Maria began preparing lunch, while Ana unpacked a small container of homemade cookies. The young woman moved around the space with comfortable familiarity, despite this being her first visit. She knew exactly where to find extra plates, which drawer held the silverware, all from Maria's detailed stories over the years. "So you're interested in corporate law?" John asked, surprising himself by initiating conversation. Ana nodded. "Environmental corporate law specifically. I believe businesses have both the power and responsibility to protect our future." Her passion was infectious, and John found himself engaged in a discussion about sustainable business practices, something Claire had championed before her death. From his seat at the kitchen island, John watched Maria and Ana move in synchronized rhythm, finishing each other's sentences and laughing at inside jokes. The godmother-goddaughter pair shared a natural bond that made the cold mansion feel suddenly warm. When Ana mentioned a difficult case study from her class, Maria offered surprisingly insightful commentary. John realized he'd never bothered to learn about Maria's interests beyond her duties in his home. As laughter filled the kitchen, John felt something shift inside him. For the first time since Claire's death, he wasn't just occupying space in his own house, he was participating in it. The walls that had contained only echoes of his solitude now resonated with conversation and connection. For once, John Smith didn't feel like an island unto himself. He felt like part of something resembling a family. Maria Costa stood in the doorway of John's home office, her hands clasped tightly in front of her uniform. The evening light cast long shadows across the room, where John Smith sat behind his massive mahogany desk, surrounded by financial reports and legal documents. "The foundation needs to reopen," she said quietly, her voice steady despite her racing heart. John looked up, surprise flickering across his face. "Excuse me?" "The Claire Smith Foundation," Maria continued, taking 2 steps into the room. "It's been dormant for almost a year now. Your wife wouldn't have wanted that." The CEO's expression hardened. "I don't recall asking for your opinion on my business decisions." "It wasn't just your business, it was Claire's heart." Maria moved closer, her resolve strengthening. "Those scholarship programs helped dozens of young women like Ana. The community outreach gave purpose to Claire's final years." John pushed away from his desk. "The foundation was losing money. The board agreed it wasn't sustainable." "That's not true," Maria said, her voice dropping to nearly a whisper. "I helped Claire with the paperwork. The foundation was financially sound." "You're overstepping, Maria." "Someone has to." For the first time in 20 years of service, she held his gaze without looking away. "No one has dared speak to you like this since Claire died. Everyone walks on eggshells around you, but she wouldn't have." John turned toward the window, his shoulders rigid. "You don't understand the complexities." "I understand grief," Maria interrupted, I understand hiding, but that foundation wasn't just Claire's legacy. It was your shared dream. The wealthy man's fingers tightened around a pen. The board meeting is next week. They've already drafted the dissolution papers. Maria took a deep breath. If you loved her, let her legacy breathe, she said, her eyes shining with tears she refused to shed. Don't bury the last living part of her. The words hung in the air between them. John's face remained impassive, but something shifted in his eyes. A flicker of recognition, perhaps even shame. I'll consider it, he finally said, his voice gruff. Maria nodded once and turned to leave. She'd said what needed saying, planted the seed that might grow. As she reached the doorway, John called after her. Why do you care so much about the foundation? She paused without turning around. Because Claire believed in second chances. She gave me one, and now I'm trying to give you yours. The door closed softly behind her, but her words remained echoing in the emptiness of the room long after she'd gone. The sound of expensive heels clicking against marble floors announced Paula Costa's arrival before she even entered the room. Fresh from her flight from Paris, John Smith's sister stormed into the mansion, designer luggage in tow and indignation written across her face. You've got to be kidding me, Paula hissed when she spotted Maria dusting the mantelpiece. She's still here? After breaking Claire's vase? Her accent had taken on European inflections during her years abroad, but the disdain in her voice needed no translation. John stood from his desk, tension immediately filling his shoulders. Paula, I didn't expect you until tomorrow. Clearly, his sister snapped, dropping her handbag on the console table. I came as soon as I heard you were letting the help make decisions about Claire's foundation. She glared at Maria, who had quietly set down her dusting cloth and straightened her posture. Maria has been instrumental in, John began, but Paula cut him off. Oh, please. She's manipulating you, John. Can't you see it? First, she conveniently finds a letter, then suddenly she's giving input on the foundation? She lowered her voice to a theatrical whisper. She's after the money, or worse, trying to replace Claire somehow. Maria's eyes flashed with rare anger, but her voice remained steady. Ms. Costa, I've served this family for 23 years. I would never— Save it, Paula interrupted. My brother may be blinded by grief, but I'm not. John stepped between them, a protective gesture that surprised even him. That's enough, Paula. Maria touched his arm gently. It's all right. I have something to show you both. She disappeared into her quarters, returning moments later with an old tape recorder, a relic from before smartphones had replaced such devices. Claire recorded this 3 days before she passed, Maria explained, her fingers hovering over the play button. I've never shared it because she asked me to wait for the right moment. When she pressed play, Claire Smith's voice filled the room, weak but determined, her words punctuated by labored breathing. Maria, my dear friend, when I'm gone, they'll try to push you away. But you're the only one who knows what John needs. The foundation, my legacy. I'm entrusting it to you both. Together, promise me. Paula's face drained of color as the recording continued, revealing intimate details only Claire could have known, instructions only she would have given. John listened, transfixed, as his wife's voice spoke of her complete trust in Maria. When the tape clicked off, the silence felt sacred. He looked at Maria, really looked at her, and the last fragments of doubt within him crumbled away. She knew, he whispered. She knew you'd be the one to save me from myself. Paula stood frozen, her accusations hanging empty in the air between them. The wooden porch swing creaked gently as John Smith settled beside Maria, a bowl of fresh peas between them. The evening air carried the scent of summer jasmine from the garden. For a man who once conducted business worth millions from sleek boardrooms, this simple domestic task seemed foreign, yet oddly comforting. My mother used to shell peas on our front porch, Maria said, her fingers working with practiced ease, back in South Carolina, before we moved north. John nodded, his own fingers clumsy with the pods. Claire mentioned you grew up in the South. What was it like? Maria paused, surprised by his genuine interest. For 20 years, she had moved through the Langford estate like a shadow, her personal history deemed irrelevant to her employer. It was hard, but beautiful, she finally said. My daddy worked the fields. Mama cleaned houses, just like me. We didn't have much, but we had music and stories. As twilight deepened, Maria's reserve slowly melted. She spoke of the one-room schoolhouse where she'd excelled, the scholarship she'd almost won, and the dream she'd set aside when her brother Pedro got into trouble. I took the blame for something he did, she admitted, her voice barely audible over the chirping crickets. A store theft. I was 18, he was 16. They would have sent him to juvenile detention. I couldn't let that happen. John looked at her with new eyes. You sacrificed your future for him? It wasn't just that, Maria replied. When you're born where I was, with the skin I have, people already decide your future for you. I just chose which limited path to take. The CEO felt something shift inside him. He'd built empires, closed billion-dollar deals, yet never truly understood the privilege that had paved his way. Maria's quiet dignity in the face of systemic barriers humbled him. I lost Claire, he said softly, but you've lost possibilities. Versions of yourself that never got to exist. Maria's eyes glistened in the porch light. We all carry ghosts of what might have been, Mr. Smith. John, he corrected gently. Please, call me John. She nodded, a small smile touching her lips. John. They continued shelling peas, the repetitive motion soothing, as twilight deepened into night. Two people from vastly different worlds, finding unexpected kinship in shared vulnerability. Both had weathered profound losses, his acute and recent, hers chronic and sustained. Yet in that moment, the chasm between employer and employee narrowed, replaced by something neither could yet name, but both could feel, the tentative foundation of friendship built on mutual respect. The quarterly board meeting had been running for 3 hours when John Smith's vision began to blur. The financial projections on the screen wavered, and the voices around the mahogany table seemed to come from underwater. He loosened his tie, feeling a strange pressure in his chest and a pounding behind his eyes. Maria Costa had been setting up refreshments in the adjacent room when she heard the commotion. She rushed in to find the CEO slumped in his chair, his face ashen and beaded with sweat. The board members stood awkwardly around him, unsure what to do. Call an ambulance, Maria commanded, her voice cutting through the panic as she pushed past 2 startled executives. I'm fine, John protested weakly, attempting to stand. Just need some air. Maria recognized the symptoms immediately. Her father had suffered from hypertension for years before it took his life. The dizziness, the disorientation, the pallor. She had seen it all before. Your blood pressure is through the roof, she said firmly, pressing her hand to his forehead. This isn't something you can power through. The businessman tried to wave her away, conscious of his colleagues watching. The meeting can wait, Maria finished, her tone leaving no room for argument. She dismissed the board with a look that would have made Claire proud. One by one, they filed out, casting concerned glances back at their formidable leader, now looking so vulnerable. When they were alone, John's stubborn facade crumbled. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. I can't be sick, he whispered. Not now. The foundation is just getting back on its feet. Maria knelt beside his chair, her uniform creasing as she took his trembling hands in hers. Years of quiet service had taught her when to be invisible and when to stand her ground. This moment demanded the latter. Look at me, she said, her voice gentle but firm. She cradled his face between her weathered palms, forcing him to meet her gaze. Don't make me keep burying the people I love, she whispered, her voice breaking. I already put Claire in the ground. I won't do the same for you. The vulnerability in her words pierced his armor. For the first time, John saw the toll his wife's death had taken on Maria, not just as an employee, but as someone who had loved Claire too. someone who, against all odds, had come to care for him as well. "I'll see a doctor," he conceded, his voice barely audible. Maria nodded, relief washing over her face. As she helped him to his feet, something shifted between them, a new understanding born of shared grief and unexpected affection. Maria sat alone on the porch swing, her fingers tracing the edge of an old photograph. The evening breeze carried the scent of the garden roses, and with it, memories she had locked away for years. Her mind drifted back to those final months with Claire Smith, nights that had changed everything. The flashbacks came in waves. Claire's bedroom bathed in soft lamplight, the quiet hum of medical equipment. Maria remembered how she would slip in after the nurses left, when Claire was too weak to sleep, but too proud to admit her fear of dying alone. "You have the gentlest hands," Claire had whispered one night as Maria adjusted her pillows. "John never notices things like that anymore." Maria recalled how she would sit beside the bed, holding Claire's thin fingers while pain medication slowly took effect. Sometimes they spoke of trivial things, recipes Claire would never cook again, gardens she would never see bloom. Other nights, when the pain subsided, Claire would ask Maria to sing the spirituals her grandmother had taught her, songs of deliverance and homegoing. "Promise me something," Claire had said during one of her last lucid nights. "When I'm gone, don't let John disappear too. He'll try to vanish into his work. He'll push everyone away." Maria remembered nodding, her throat tight with unshed tears. "He trusts you, Maria, even when he acts like he doesn't need anyone." Claire's eyes had been unnaturally bright. "You're the only one who sees him, really sees him." Now sitting in the gathering twilight, Maria knew it was time. She found John in his study, staring at financial reports without seeing them. "There's something you should know," she said quietly. John looked up, his expression guarded. Maria took a deep breath and began to speak of those private nights, of Claire's courage, her fears, her final wishes. She described how Claire had made her promise to watch over him, to remind him of joy when grief became too heavy. "She loved you until her last breath," Maria said, her voice breaking, "and she trusted me to make sure you remembered how to live." John's face crumpled. For years he had maintained rigid control, building walls of anger and isolation. Now those walls collapsed. His shoulders shook as decades of suppressed grief poured out. Maria did what she had done for Claire. She simply stayed. She placed her hand on his shoulder, a silent anchor in the storm. "All this time," he whispered between ragged breaths, "I thought I was alone." "You were never alone," Maria answered softly. Claire made sure of that. In that moment, John Smith wept not just for his wife, but for himself, and for the woman who had carried their shared grief in silence for so long. The Claire Smith Memorial Scholarship for Law was born on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, with Anna Santos standing confidently at the head of the polished mahogany table. The boardroom of the Claire Smith Foundation, dormant for so long, now hummed with renewed purpose as board members leaned forward in their leather chairs, captivated by the young woman's presentation. "These girls don't just need money," Anna explained, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. "They need mentorship, connections, and someone who believes in them." She gestured toward the carefully prepared folders before each board member, containing statistics on female law students from low-income backgrounds. From the corner of the room, Maria Costa watched with tears threatening to spill. The young woman speaking with such conviction was no longer the little girl who had once hidden behind her skirts at church socials. Anna had blossomed into everything Maria had hoped she would become: strong, articulate, and compassionate. John Smith sat at the opposite end of the table, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. The CEO's expression remained measured, but his eyes betrayed his pride. Over the past months, he had grown fond of Anna, seeing in her the same fire that had drawn him to Claire years ago. "We'll start with 5 scholarships," Anna continued, clicking to the next slide on her presentation. "Full tuition, plus a living stipend, Each recipient will be paired with a practicing attorney for mentorship. She paused, her voice softening, and we'll call it the Claire Smith Pathway to Justice. A murmur of approval rippled through the room. Even Paula, who had flown in from Europe specifically for this meeting, nodded her reluctant agreement. When the board unanimously approved the proposal, Maria couldn't contain her joy. She approached her goddaughter with open arms, embracing her tightly. Claire would be so proud, she whispered, smoothing Anna's hair as she had done since childhood. And I couldn't be prouder. Later that evening, as they celebrated with a quiet dinner at the estate, John raised his glass. To Anna, he said, his voice unusually warm, and to the women who shaped her. Maria felt something shift inside her chest, a lightening, a release. For decades, she had poured herself into others, first Claire, then John, and always Anna. She had given without expectation of return, finding purpose in service and love. Now, watching Anna discuss future plans with animated gestures, Maria glimpsed a future beyond her own lifetime. Her legacy wouldn't be measured in possessions or wealth, but in the values she had instilled, the love she had given, and the young woman who would carry it forward. For the first time in her 63 years, Maria Costa felt truly immortal. The doorbell rang through the Langford estate, just as Maria Costa was arranging fresh flowers in the foyer. She wasn't expecting visitors, and John had left for a foundation meeting downtown. When she opened the heavy oak door, 20 years of buried memories crashed over her like a wave. "Maria," the man said, his voice deeper than she remembered, but unmistakably familiar. "It's me, Pedro." Pedro Costa stood on the doorstep, his weathered face a roadmap of hard years. The brother who had disappeared after she took the blame for his mistake, a theft that cost her a college scholarship and nearly her freedom. The brother whose absence had carved a hollow space in her heart that even her devotion to the Smith family couldn't fill. "What are you doing here?" Maria whispered, her hand gripping the doorframe for support. "How did you find me?" Pedro shifted uncomfortably. "I saw a news article about the foundation. Your picture was there, standing next to that billionaire." He gestured vaguely toward the mansion behind her. "Took me 3 buses to get here from Newark." Maria hesitated, then stepped aside to let him in. The grand foyer seemed to swallow him whole. This man who had once been her protector, her confidant, her blood. "I don't have much time," she said, leading him to the kitchen where they could speak privately. It wasn't entirely true, but old instincts of self-preservation died hard. Pedro sat at the kitchen island, his calloused hands fidgeting with a paper napkin. "I've been sober for 4 years now," he said without preamble. "Working construction in Jersey, got my own apartment." His eyes finally met hers. "I came to say I'm sorry, Maria, for everything." The words she had imagined hearing countless times now hung in the air between them. Maria felt something shift inside her. The quiet strength she had discovered in standing up to John, in honoring Claire's memory, in mentoring Anna. "I forgave you a long time ago," she said, surprised to find it was true. "But I never stopped missing my brother." Pedro's eyes welled with tears. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "Maybe not," Maria replied, her voice gentle but firm. "But forgiveness isn't about deserving. It's about choosing to move forward." When they embraced, it was awkward. 2 strangers trying to remember how to be family. But it was real. Maria felt the years of resentment begin to dissolve, replaced by something fragile but hopeful. "Would you like some tea?" she asked, reaching for Claire's favorite tin. "I have time to hear about those 4 years, and maybe the 16 before that too." The brushstrokes came hesitantly at first. John Smith held the paintbrush like a foreign object, his fingers remembering the motion, but his mind struggling to reconnect with the artistic passion he'd abandoned after Claire's death. The easel had been gathering dust in his study for 3 years now. He'd set it up by the bay window overlooking the garden, where the morning light spilled generously across the canvas. Outside, Maria Costa moved among the flowers, her practiced hands tending to the yellow tulips that had become a symbol of renewal in the Langford estate. She hadn't noticed him watching, studying the gentle way she bent to touch each bloom, speaking to them in whispers he couldn't hear from his window. Just a quick sketch, John told himself, but soon the minutes stretched into hours. The CEO, who commanded boardrooms with unwavering authority, now found himself completely absorbed in capturing the light as it played across Maria's face. Her quiet dignity, the slight tilt of her head when she was lost in thought, these were the details he found himself obsessing over. "You still have talent," a voice said from behind him. He turned to find Anna Santos standing in the doorway, her law textbooks clutched against her chest. "I'm rusty," he admitted, stepping back to assess his work. "She doesn't know you're painting her, does she?" The young woman smiled, approaching to study the half-finished portrait. "No," John replied, "and I'm not sure I'll show her." Anna's eyes softened. "You should. She'd be honored." As the afternoon progressed, John added more details. The weathered hands that had cared for his home for decades, the proud set of shoulders that had carried burdens he was only beginning to understand. He painted the yellow tulips surrounding her, Claire's favorites, now Maria's domain. What struck him most was how naturally Maria belonged in this setting, not as staff, not as an employee, but as the heart of what remained of his family. The realization humbled him. This woman, whom his sister Paula had so quickly dismissed, had been the silent force holding everything together when grief had threatened to shatter it all. When the light began to fade, John set down his brush and stepped back. The portrait wasn't just a likeness, it was a testimony. In capturing Maria among the flowers, he had inadvertently painted the story of resilience, of grace under pressure, of quiet strength that outlasts storms. For the first time since Claire's passing, John felt something like peace settle over him. He would finish the painting tomorrow, and perhaps, when it was done, he would finally find the courage to show Maria how clearly he now saw her. John Smith stood frozen in the attic, holding a velvet-wrapped object in his trembling hands. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the dusty window, illuminating what appeared impossible. The original Ming Dynasty vase he thought had shattered weeks ago in his fit of rage. "Maria, come up here," he called, his voice barely steady. Maria Costa hurried up the narrow stairs, her brow furrowed with concern. When she saw what John held, her hand flew to her mouth. "But how? I swept up the pieces myself," she whispered. John carefully unwrapped a folded note tucked inside the vase's protective cloth. Claire's elegant handwriting flowed across the page. "Some things are meant to be replaced. Others are meant to be treasured. I knew someday this vase might break. Material things do. The replica downstairs can shatter, but the memories we've built remain whole. Love, Claire." The CEO sank onto an old trunk, the vase cradled in his lap. "She knew," he murmured. "She knew I might lose control someday." Maria sat beside him, her eyes glistening. "Your wife understood people better than anyone I've ever known. All this time, I've been mourning a broken vase that wasn't even real," John said, a laugh bubbling up unexpectedly through his tears. The housekeeper began laughing too, softly at first, then with abandon. Soon, they were both shaking with laughter that bordered on hysteria. Years of tension, breaking like waves against rocks. "Claire always said you put too much importance on objects," Maria said, wiping her eyes. "Remember how she donated half her designer clothes without telling you? And replaced our wedding china with that mismatched set she loved?" John added, his face brightening with the memory. They sat together in comfortable silence, the real vase between them, not as a symbol of wealth or status, but as Claire's final lesson in perspective. She orchestrated this from beyond. John said finally, "One last reminder about what's truly irreplaceable." Maria nodded, thinking of all the broken things that had been mended in recent months. Relationships, trust, purpose. "Your wife was teaching us both, I think." John carefully placed the vase on a nearby shelf. "Let's leave it here," he decided. "Not on display, not hidden away, just safe." As they descended from the attic, something had shifted between them. The broken replica had first brought them together in conflict. The real vase now united them in understanding. They carried Claire's wisdom with them, that the most precious things in life weren't things at all, but the connections between people who chose to see each other's value. The autumn sunlight streamed through the bay windows of the study as John Smith sat at Claire's old writing desk. He'd avoided this room for months after her passing, but now found himself drawn to it daily. While organizing her papers, something Maria had gently encouraged, his fingers brushed against a sealed envelope tucked beneath the desk's leather blotter. His name was written on it in Claire's elegant script, but unlike her other letters, this one bore no date. With trembling hands, John broke the seal and unfolded the pages. "My dearest John," it began, "if you're reading this, I've left too many things unsaid." The letter continued, revealing Claire's innermost thoughts during her final months. But one passage made his breath catch. "My greatest regret isn't leaving you. It's that I never had the courage to tell the world what Maria Costa truly means to us. She isn't our employee, she's our family. I've treated her like help when she deserved to be treated like the sister I never had." John lowered the letter, memories flooding back. How Maria had held Claire through nights of pain, how she'd memorized every medication schedule, how she'd preserved Claire's dignity until the very end. "She knows you better than anyone," Claire had written. "Even better than I do sometimes. When you push everyone away, she stays. Not because we pay her, but because she loves us. I was too caught up in social expectations to acknowledge that publicly. Don't make my mistake." That evening, John found Maria folding linens in the East Wing. Her efficient movements paused when she saw his reddened eyes. "Is everything all right?" she asked, concern etching her features. "I found something," he said, voice hoarse with emotion, "from Claire." They sat together on the window seat, the same place where Claire had often rested during her illness. John handed Maria the letter, watching as tears welled in her eyes while she read. "She never told me," Maria whispered. "She should have," John replied, taking her weathered hands in his. "You weren't just in her pocket, Maria. You were in her heart. And now, you're in mine." Maria looked away, overwhelmed. For decades, she'd moved through this mansion like a shadow, always present but never fully seen. "The Foundation board meeting is tomorrow," John said quietly. "I'd like you to attend, not as staff, but as family, as Claire wanted." Maria nodded, unable to speak. Outside, the garden she'd tended for 30 years bloomed with late roses, Claire's favorite. Inside, something else was finally blooming. Recognition of the family they had always been but never acknowledged. The Langford estate transformed on what would have been Claire Smith's birthday. Instead of a somber memorial, the grand mansion opened its doors to laughter and celebration. Children from the scholarship program darted across the manicured lawn, their joy echoing through gardens that had once known only silence. Young women in crisp blazers gathered near the fountain, sharing dreams made possible by the revitalized Claire Smith Foundation. Maria Costa stood beneath a flowering magnolia, watching it all unfold with tears glistening in her eyes. The yellow tulip she had planted months ago now framed the garden path, swaying gently in the spring breeze. She smoothed her dress, not the uniform she had worn for decades, but a flowing blue garment Anna had helped her choose. "They're all here because of you," Anna Santos whispered, squeezing her godmother's hand. The young woman had just finished delivering a powerful speech about educational equity, her voice carrying the same conviction that had earned her the Foundation's first leadership position. Across the lawn, Pedro approached cautiously, still finding his footing in this world that had welcomed him back. He nodded at his sister, a silent acknowledgement of how far they'd come. Behind him, Lucas Oliveira discreetly took notes for a feature on the Foundation's Renaissance. his journalistic skepticism long replaced by genuine admiration. Even Paula lingered near the terrace, her usual sharpness softened as she watched her brother move through the crowd with newfound purpose. She caught Maria's eye and offered a small, reluctant nod. Not quite friendship, but no longer hostility. The jazz quartet in the corner began playing Claire's favorite melody, the notes drifting through the air like memories given voice. John Smith excused himself from a conversation with donors and crossed the garden toward Maria, a cream-colored envelope in his hand. "I have something for you," he said, his voice steady but vulnerable. The CEO, who once commanded boardrooms with cold authority, now stood before her with the humility of a man who had learned to value what truly mattered. Maria turned to face him fully, no longer the invisible presence who had moved through rooms unnoticed. John unfolded a letter, his own this time, and began to read aloud. "Maria, you carried Claire's heart when mine was too broken to hold it. You preserved our family when I tried to shatter it. Today, as we celebrate Claire's life, I celebrate you, not as my employee, but as the guardian of our home, the keeper of our memories, and the heart of our family." As the last word settled between them, Maria embraced the man who had once fired her, now finding in his arms the belonging she had always sought. Around them, Claire's legacy bloomed, not just in programs and scholarships, but in the healing of two souls who had found their way home through loss, forgiveness, and the truth hidden in a pocket.